Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the exam review for Dr. Fripp's Introduction to Art History class. I'm going to be trying to record this, so from time to time I may pause to see if there's anything going on with the recording. And I may also stop to write down questions if you ask me something that I don't know the answer to, so I make sure to get that right. And then I'd also like to invite you at the end of the session to let me know if there was anything you would have liked me to have done that I didn't. And then, of course, after the exam, if there was something you felt like we could have covered better in this, let me know, because we've got 3 more tests over the course of the semester, and I'm happy to adapt these to meet you guys' needs. So I will do what I can. We ready? So what I thought we'd do tonight is cover the exam format. Since it's the first exam for Dr. Fripp's class, we probably won't have to do that again. And then I'll go through a few quick study tips, and then we'll spend the bulk of the time working through the key themes just to make sure you've kind of got your heads wrapped around what we've learned in each of the sections of the class. And then I'll open it up for Q&A. So the format is it will have 10 multiple choice questions, 3 fill-in-the-blank questions, and I'll post this up on eCollege when we're done so you don't have to write everything here down, 2 short answers on function and or meaning, and then 1 essay question. So it's important on the multiple choice questions to note there may be more than one right answer. So there'll be an A, a B, a C option. D will be all of the above, and E will be none of the above. And so you may end up circling A and B, or A and C, or A, B, C, and then you realize you should have circled D. That's fine. But because it is a combined response to the multiple choice, there's no partial credit. So if you get A and you should have gotten A and B, you missed it. On the fill in the blanks, you'll start out with identifying the works. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then there'll be 1 or 2 additional blanks to ask for you to tell us about the meaning of the work. And then on the short answers, again, you'll start by identifying the works. And then we'll hand out blue books so that you can write your short answers in the blue book. So you'll get just a packet of paper for the multiple choice and the fill in the blank stuff, and you can answer on those pages. Then we'll hand out blue books for the short answers and the essay. You don't need to bring a blue book. All you need is a pen. And we would like you to use sentences on the short answers, not bullet points. And then finally on the essay, you'll start out identifying 4 works, and then you'll write an essay. Then we will give you a thesis statement. So you don't have to come up with a thesis, but you do have to write then an essay to support what that statement says. And typically it's around how do the form, the subject matter, the style, the intended audience, the intention or function, and or historical, cultural, and religious context relate to the work. So all the kind of stuff we've been practicing in the little sample questions we've done in class. Any questions on that so far? Okay, it'll be an hour and 12 minutes long. Yeah.
On the multiple choice, how does that work if there's multiple answers? Is it every question, or we're just supposed to figure it out?
Any question may have 1 or more answers. So if you read through options A, B, and C, and you think A and C are right, you would circle A and C, or you would write A and C next to the question. If you think it's A, B, and C, you could just go with D, which is all of the above. Obviously, if you were to circle A, B, C, you would get full credit for the question. We're not going to make you circle D, all of the above. Is that clearer? We can try to maybe go through an example a little bit later, if you want. Let's see. And then, okay, so an hour and 12 minutes. At the end, I'll go back through the slides one more time slowly so you can go back and check a question you weren't sure about the answer of or whatever. So the last few minutes you can kind of devote to polishing stuff up or checking stuff. So the multiple choice questions, you'll get 2 minutes each. So it'll be a total of 20 minutes and 20 points. The fill in the blanks are 4 minutes each, and they'll be 12 minutes total with 3 to 4 points each, depending on whether there's 1 or 2 additional blanks for 10 points total. And then the 2 short answers will be 5 minutes each, 10 points total, 10 minutes total, and 6 points each, 12 points total. And then the long essay, you'll get 10 minutes to brainstorm, and please feel free to take a page in your blue book and just scribble just put down your thoughts, and then go to a fresh page to write your essay. That's absolutely fine. Then we'll give you 20 minutes to write the essay, and that'll be worth 20 points. As I mentioned, the blue books will be supplied. You only need to bring a writing implement, although, speaking from experience, I had a pen run out in the middle of an exam, so you might want to bring another one. And then the room is going to be pretty tight, I think, particularly for the morning class. So if you will space yourselves out as much as the room will allow, one chair between to the extent possible, we would appreciate it. We are going to put the exam on auto advance, and I think you might have seen the little circle filling in like a clock. That will let you know how much time is left on each of the questions. Okay, when we ask you to identify a work, there will be the word title and a blank, the word period and a blank, the word date and a blank, and the medium and a blank. And if it's an architectural piece, it will also ask for the location. Use your slide sheet as gospels on these. If it's on the slide sheet, how you were supposed to answer the question. On the dates, most of the stuff that we've covered so far is going to be BCE, and you need to say BCE. If you don't put anything, we will assume you mean AD or CE. So make sure you pay attention to that as you're studying the slide sheets. And if it asks for period, sometimes on the slide sheet we call it a culture. Use those two interchangeably. So basically the second piece of information on your slide sheet is what belongs in that blank. For the identifications on the short answers and the fill in the blanks, you'll get a half a point per component. So if there's 4 components, title, period, date, and medium, you would get a total of 2 points, but we'll obviously give you credit for partially right answers on that. If it's got an architectural piece, it would be 2.5 points total. On the long essay, the value assigned to the identification is going to be just a 1/4 point per component. Any questions about that? Okay, details matter, so be specific. Especially when you're doing your short answers in the essay, avoid using words like some or various or many. It would be much better to say, for example, and list out a couple of examples rather than leave it just kind of open and blank. I also listed here a few spelling traps. I'm not going to read through each of them in detail because I'm sure you guys can do that on your own time. But please watch out for this.
Will points be deducted?
Yes.
For spelling?
Yes. I forgot to mention here, the date should be correct to the century for this exam. And if there's a range, like if it runs from 2500 BC to 1700 BC, and you choose to label it as 2000 BCE, use the C abbreviation for circa or about to let us know that you know that it's an approximate date. Does that make sense?
Can you say that again?
So some of the works that we covered in this period, we don't know the exact date. So if something is estimated to have happened between 2500 and 1700 BCE, say, let us know. If you choose, great. If you've got 2500 to 1700 and you know that, write that down. If you're estimating it at 2000, then put the C dot, which stands for about, approximate.
Can we put that before?
Yes, it goes before.
So like C dot 200 or 2000.
Right. Right.
Do we lose points if we do that?
If you use the C dot, no, as long as it's within the right range. If you put C dot 500 for something that's really from 2000 to 500, then yes, you lose points. And on the media, if it's a copy of a bronze original, you will need to know that. So we have lots and lots of Roman copies of Greek originals. And you remember that little stump thingy that they're leaning against is kind of your clue that it originally was a bronze. Make sure you memorize that as you're memorizing the medium. Okay, for those of you who are new to studying art history, the key to success is to make flashcards and memorize them. Not approximately memorize them, memorize them. Then review the cultural themes and the main points in each of the sections, and those should come from your notes and complement it with the book, and study your vocabulary. And I will give you a really important tip right now. Banish the word realistic from your vocabulary. Don't use it. You can use idealized, you can use naturalistic, you can use individualized. Do not call something realistic. Hopefully that's really, really clear, because it's a really easy way to lose some points. The flashcard, what I usually do is print out a bunch of images on the page, like I'll do a 4-up on the page and then cut it up, and on the back I'll put all the specifics off of the slide sheet, and then on the other side of it I'll put why it was made, what it meant, whatever we talked about in class as important about that work. And you all know that you're working off of the PowerPoint study guides that are on eCollege, right? You're not trying to look at every single image we looked at in class. Okay, any questions about the format or how to study for this stuff?
Can you go back one second?
Sure. Okay, so I thought we'd just go in order. Not very adventuresome, but it'll get the job done. And start with prehistoric art. So the things I would be sure to remember about prehistoric art, and by the way, these key themes are not meant to be comprehensive. Obviously, that is what your notes and the book are for. And also, we only have an hour tonight. Can't do a quarter of a semester's worth of review in 1 hour. Paleolithic is distinct from the Neolithic period, so make sure you understand which pieces of art come from which of those two periods. And the Paleolithic period was the one characterized by nomadic tribes, and the art was valued for portability. And often we were looking at found objects and found sites rather than consistent spaces. In the Neolithic is when we start to see settlements. We see signs of social organization and calendar functions. Things get larger and more permanent. And we really start to see for the first time any sign of formal, what you would call formal architecture. We'll get the occasional human figure that's recognizable as a human figure, but we don't get any sort of individualized works. And we see twisted perspective and exaggerated elements. And most of these works have meanings associated with fertility and successful hunting. That's as far as we've gotten. Any questions specific to the prehistoric period? Okay. So then next we turned to Near Eastern art. And just a reminder, we still see some... Yes, ma'am?
I'm sorry, can you go back one slide just one more time?
Sure. Oops. How about the other direction? There we go.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Oops. Now I'm caught up in going that direction. All right. Okay. When we get to the Near East, we are still overlapping to some degree some of the Paleolithic period. But we do start to see then increasing signs of social organization, growing from settlements to cities to city-states. We see writing systems emerge, and then laws. Agriculture is what makes possible these more stable settlements, and the structures start to get even larger. Here's where we begin to run into explicit references to kingship and to gods, and art that speaks to their accomplishments and that tries to secure their place in the social order. And architecture continues to gain importance as the settlements grow. Any specific questions around Near Eastern art? Okay, then we moved on to Egypt. Here we start to see the rulers uniting and ruling large geographic areas. Remember, we saw references to the upper Nile and the lower Nile in the symbolism that was on some of the artworks. The religion is clearly polytheistic and is tied to the pharaoh's power. He starts to characterize himself as a deity, and funerary architecture takes on a great deal of importance. Here's where we first started talking about how form follows function and how the Egyptians were very interested in permanence, and they created their art for the dead and for the preservation of the Ka. This is also the first time we see a canon of proportions emerge. And that, again, just as a reminder, is the standardized way of depicting the body. And that recurs in Greek art and, again, in Roman. And the other characteristic of Egyptian art is that it's remarkably static. It does not change, except for the Akhenaten period. And I think there's a chance I misspelled Akhenaten there, so don't use that spelling. Go to your slide sheet. It's always great when your editing eye kicks in as you're standing at the podium. All right, then we had a great day in Mesoamerica. Just like we saw in Egypt and the Near East, organized cities, highly complex religious beliefs. And here the two key ideas to remember are the axis mundi, that connection between heaven and earth, and the need to sacrifice oneself or captives in order to honor the gods' sacrifice for for humans. So taking care of the gods so they'll continue to take care of people. Power in the place of the ruler is an important concept in their art. They have pretty sophisticated architecture, and then really naturalism and individualism to a degree we have not seen in the previous cultures we were looking at. Then 2 days on Greek art. The connection between the Egyptian period and the Greek period is really important, so make sure you pay attention to the things that you see that happened in Greece that were drawing on the Egyptian tradition. The way the Greeks treated the human body in their early statues was really directly related to how the Egyptians had done it, and again, we saw that canon of proportion. And then the most important part about Greek art is how much it progressed over the centuries. So we started with pretty blocky human forms and progresses into ever more naturalistic depictions of the human body. And then we start to get drama and emotion and expressionism towards the end. And some of the key ideas around Greek art include the archaic smile. Remember that cute little smile that people had? I should say that men had, because I don't think there were any. There was one woman, wasn't there, the Kore statue with an archaic smile. The contrapposto pose. The idea that the athletic and ideal figure of the male nude was really the pinnacle of what a human body could look like. And then the emergence of the female nude finally at the end of the High Classic. Order and perfection govern the way the Greeks think about both their art and their architecture, and really the only architecture we discussed was the Parthenon. Really the epitome of order and perfection, very precise mathematical calculations, thinking about the optical illusion of how the columns rose into the air. All of those features of the Parthenon reflect how the Greeks thought about their world. Any questions about Greek art? The stuff we saw in Greece? Okay, and then Roman art, shockingly, highly influenced. Did you have a question? No? It's stretching. Highly influenced by Greek art and architecture, but we start to see greater individualism. We can really see who people are and identify the rulers that are being depicted. And then Roman art starts to move in some new directions. So it takes Greek art and builds on it. For the first time we see, in the Western world anyway, we see overt political propaganda, an emphasis on their military accomplishments as the civilization goes from republic to empire. And then the Romans are really renowned for their contributions to architecture in the invention of concrete and then the use of arches, domes, and vaults in their buildings. Any questions about Rome? Yes?
So when you say republic to empire, you mean they now start getting emperors?
Correct. So remember in class we talked about, I will get the years wrong, so I'm just not even going to try, but shortly after the birth of Christ, Julius Caesar is assassinated by Brutus and his cohorts, the Civil War. That's the end of the Republican period when Rome is governed by a Senate of elders. Civil War ensues, and it only settles down, I think, about 20 years later when I think it's Octavius defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra and becomes Augustus Caesar. And he's the first emperor. And from there, it is handed down through a series of, I think it's mostly inherited, but then there'll be the occasional uprising to overthrow the emperor so somebody else can be emperor. But that's when things start to get really ugly for Rome. The Republican period is quite short, but the art is quite different than it is in the period of the empire. Anything else about Rome? Okay. And then finally, we're not going to learn about this till tomorrow, so a little preview of things to pay attention to in the early Christian and Byzantine art class tomorrow. Once again, influenced by people who came before them, in this case the Romans. We'll see a lot of the same formal qualities, but totally different subject matter. We move completely away from depicting generals and emperors and into subjects out of the Bible. It's going to be secret underground art to begin with. A lot of what we know about the early Christians comes from art in the catacombs. Then Constantine, in about 300 CE, becomes a Christian, declares Christianity to be a legitimate religion. They stop killing people for being Christian. It can come out from under the catacombs and be seen. And it goes so far as later in the period, the Christians will begin to convert many former Roman structures to churches. I think we talked about that a little bit with the Pantheon in class. It evolves into the Byzantine period, where the naturalism that we saw in Greek and Roman art really disappears, and it becomes far more stylized than it was. And then we also go through a period of iconoclasm where the Byzantines destroy quite a few of the pagan works. So I can't remember if we talked about it in class or not, but we did mention how all the bronzes, how we had so few bronzes left. And part of the reason was the Byzantines felt that they were idolatrous and so melted them down. And the reason that Marcus Aurelius' statue survived is that people thought he was Constantine. So he was okay because he was Christian. And then the big piece of architecture we're going to look at tomorrow is the Hagia Sophia, which is in Istanbul, then Constantinople, a really magnificent church that Constantine built. Kind of riffing on some of the ideas that the Romans had, but then taking it in his own direction. So much to look forward to tomorrow. So that is all I have in terms of content, and I am open to answer your questions and talk through anything you want to deal with in more detail. Yes?
When we talk about the Hagia Sophia, are we going to be talking about the inside of it or like the structure as a whole?
I don't know. I haven't seen the lecture yet. I imagine it will be mostly about the inside because that is really where they spent the most money. It's incredible. It's all gold inside and mosaics. So there's lots to look at there. Yes?
This might be too specific, but on the PowerPoint, like I was making note cards and I didn't see the figurine of a woman or holy thing on the PowerPoint site that you could download on your own computer, so I wasn't sure if we needed to know those.
Figurine of woman and the, which one?
Holy thing, they're
Bull.
both like Greek.
But they are on the slide list?
Yeah.
Okay. I will double check on that. Yes?
I specifically remember asking like if spelling counted and she said no, just if we're like in the ballpark, so did she change her mind?
Well, it depended on the civilization. So for Greeks, Greeks and Romans, you should probably get it right. For the Sumerians and the Mesopotamians and the Mesoamericans especially, you're allowed to give it your best shot. Yes.
Are terms idealized and naturalized interchangeable?
No. So this is something I still struggle with because and actually I will tell you, I've had professors who sort of seem to have different interpretations of it. Naturalized, they both run on a spectrum. And natural means you can tell what it's supposed to be. So you can think about maybe the Venus of Willendorf. Yeah, you can tell it's supposed to be a woman. Is it naturalized, naturalistic? Well, I mean, you can tell it's a woman, but then you compare it to something like the bronze warrior, the Greek warrior, and he looks really naturalistic. So if you were given a question that compared those two and asked which one of them was more naturalistic, that's pretty easy to answer because it's a spectrum. If you were to put her next to something that's also stylized and ask which one is more naturalistic, I think I would say neither because they're kind of the same in the way they treat the human body. So you're really looking for, when you're trying to make a call on naturalism, you're really looking for, the details, the muscles, the curly hair, the facial expressions that let you know that the sculptor has really paid a lot of attention to the way the human body looks and moves and the proportions and so forth. Idealized is kind of like thinking about the difference between what you look like when you wake up in the morning and what you would look like if you were on the cover of Vogue. So somebody had a chance to put your makeup on, do your hair, and perhaps even do a little airbrushing or photoshopping to make you look even better than you do with your makeup and your hair done. That is an idealized portrait. And I think of the opposite of idealized as being realistic. So that's what you look like first thing in the morning without your dew.
That helps.
It only a little bit helps. Someday I'm going to figure that out and figure out how to explain it really well, but I'm still not there yet.
So we would say like Greek art is more naturalized in the sense of like you're paying attention to the like anatomy and muscles and everything, whereas like ancient Egyptian art was more idealized because they're just small and like youthful and like relatively the same.
Yep. Let's see. Yeah, so in Greek art, we talk about the progression of naturalism. So we start out with those really stiff pores. You recognize them as human. They're certainly more naturalistic than our Venus of Willendorf or maybe some of the cave paintings, but they're nowhere near as naturalistic as the Greeks will evolve to. So you might, if you had to write something about that, qualify it and say this is an example of early naturalism. It's much more naturalistic than a cave painting, but not as good as some of the Hellenistic art got to be or something. Yes?
I was just wondering how, textbook heavy, I guess, the test is. Because when I look at the textbook, I feel like it's basically just, saying exactly what the lecture's kind of said.
So I would use the textbook as a complement to the lecture. So if you feel like you got really great notes on a work from the lecture, maybe don't focus on that. But if it was one of those moments when your mind wandered a little bit, that's a great paragraph to read again in the book. And particularly like those inset things where they go into depth about a piece, I think those are worth reviewing pretty closely. Yes?
The pieces in the textbook that we didn't cover in class, are we going to be responsible for those?
If it's not in the PowerPoint and it's not on the slide sheet, no. What else? Really, the hardest part is memorizing those facts and figures. But once you memorize them, then you've already got half the exam figured out, and the rest of it you should be able to reason through just by looking at the pieces. So I will tell you, the format is such that we'll sometimes put up 2 images at once, and so just make sure that you're writing about the proper one. It'll have a number next to it. If you have any questions about that kind of thing, please ask, rather than take the risk of getting something silly like that wrong. Yeah?
Can you go back to the first few slides?
Sure.
please?
I say I can go back. Let's see. Here? So I'm going to post this to eCollege too. Yeah.
And do we need to know a lot about like the history of like in the beginning of the chapters it talks about like denial and all that?
Only to the extent that it's going to help you explain an artwork. So really focus, like when you're reading, when you're looking at your flashcards and you're thinking about a pyramid, how does that fit into the history of Egypt, and why is that pyramid important? So it's all, the context is important to the extent that it helps you talk about the artwork. Yes?
When you said that, like, the timing and the little circle at the bottom to kind of let us know, so does that mean that each, like, question is timed specifically, or we will generally have, like, 20 minutes to answer the 10 multiple choice?
You will have, so the multiple choice will be, you'll have a piece of paper that's got this work demonstrates the following, ... A, B, C, D, E. And you'll have an image up here that is that work. So if that image is on a slide by itself, that image is going to disappear in 2 minutes.
Okay.
If that image is on a slide and it's with, the next question, then it's going to disappear in 4 minutes.
Okay.
So, but then at the end, if you need, I'll go through the whole thing again kind of slowly, so if there's something you wanted to look at again, you can. Anything else?
Which side of the Nile was considered the land of the dead?
Sorry?
Which side of the Nile was considered where they buried everybody?
The west, where the sun went down. I guess if you gave birth, you were supposed to do it facing east. I don't know. All right, well, we'll call that a night, and please let me know what worked tonight and what you'd like me to do next time, if anything differently. You can say it now, or you can email it to me. I'm happy to make this better for y'all as we go.